Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Drake Sheets on Big 12 with us today. Drake, it's talking season. It's coming to an end, though. ACC's last day, Big Ten's last day, SEC and Big 12 went the last couple of weeks. A lot of questions with the Florida State Clemson ACC settlement, just where the ACC is now. Now, in the very, very short term, they're fine, right? Like nothing's changing, like this year, next year, they're good. Where are they long term? We were talking about this offer, and maybe for the first or second time in program history and symbiotic relationship history, we may disagree on a few things here, but we'll see kind of how things go. What are your thoughts on just where the ACC is in general? And then we'll go back and forth here.
If we start the conversation on where the ACC is in general, I think we started with Memphis, oddly enough. Reason being, I think the Big 12 is giving you some, in the airport, they have the guy, you've been in airports here recently, they got the guys who bring the planes on in, and they're the ones that you watch for the signal. I think the Big 12 is sending a signal right now by not adding Memphis, despite the girth of that offer. $200+ million. You can exit in 2030 without any questions asked, and the Big 12 makes 200 big bucks, and Memphis goes away. The reason the Big 12 said no, in my opinion, is because the ACC is increasingly weakening. And the reason that we know that is because year in, year out, now as we track to 2030, 2031, Florida State and Clemson can exit for less and less money. We know that's exactly what they want. And this Band-Aid the ACC has put over those two schools is a positive one for the conference, but it's still a Band-Aid. And I still do believe, and I think you would agree, Clemson and Florida State are looking for avenues out in the next 5 to 6 years as TV contracts are reworked. And the Big 12, if Brett Yormark, this is why I think the ACC is on not its last leg, but getting close. If the Big 12 did not believe the Louisvilles of the world or NC State or Miami as a pipe dream or North Carolina, Virginia, Duke, your school, if they didn't believe that they would be available here in 5-6 years when Clemson and Florida State try to exit, I think the Big 12 would bite at Memphis. But instead, what Yormark wants to do is not overload the league, dilute the league. We're already trying to make UCF and Houston, Cincinnati feel comfortable in football. Why do that with Memphis when hopefully here in a few years, you have the ability to go get bigger brands out of the ACC? I believe, one, the Big 12 is looking directly at the ACC to poach here in a few seasons. I think, two, Memphis put the stipulation in there for the no risk clause, where they could exit in 2030. That year is very important. Memphis knows the Big 12 will be on the prowl in 2030, the same way the Big 12 was on the prowl in 2022 and 23 with the Pac-12. That's why I think the ACC's death date could come as early as 2030, 2031. But I know you disagree. You see a little more life in the Jim Phillips era of this conference.
I like you a lot, and I don't like the ACC.
Yeah.
So it actually pains me to do this, but I am just being honest, right? Like, this is just the way I see it. It pains me to have to say that the ACC may have done something. I don't know if by accident. I don't know if, what, but it pains me to give them any credit at all. But I'm going to do it. And so maybe people will realize that I'm at least being sincere with this and not just, I'm the last guy that wants to defend the ACC. I promise you that. Yes, I agree. I think Florida, maybe UNC, maybe Miami out in 2030. Although with this, I do have an interesting thought on Miami, and what I'm going to say for the other teams maybe applies to the Canes as well. I think that if Florida State and Clemson leave in 2030, I think they get a full share to whichever conference they go to, right? I think UNC is probably in that same category. Miami, probably, but I'm less certain there. Anybody else who would leave, try to go to the Power 2, right? The Big Ten or the SEC, I don't think they get a full share, right? Mm-hmm. Could a Louisville, in theory, go? Yes, but they're probably coming in at like a half share, a quarter share for some number of years. So I don't worry about many other teams going to the SEC or the Big Ten. And then you look at, okay, well, who's left in the ACC? What are the biggest brands left in the ACC past Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and North Carolina? Miami, again, maybe you could even leave in this conversation. Well, you're looking at the Louisvilles, you're looking at the Georgia Techs, the NC States, Pittsburgh, maybe, SMU, if they can sustain success. And what I think about that 2030 timeline is, one, it would cost those programs, $75 million to leave at that moment. I don't know, outside of maybe SMU, who could pony up that kind of money when it comes to Louisville and Georgia Tech and other programs. You're also looking at what the revenue is in 2030 if you're SMU, if you're Louisville, and you can be at the top of the league when it comes to TV ratings. Georgia Tech was number one in the ACC last year in TV ratings. Now, did that have to do with them playing Georgia and Florida State in standalone games? Absolutely. However, if you're Georgia Tech and you're making an additional $15 to $20 million in the ACC compared to what you would make in the Big 12, does it become harder for the Big 12 to poach you? Would Georgia Tech say, you know what? We're going to pay $75 million to leave, and then we're going to make less in the Big 12 because of this unequal revenue sharing that Florida State and Clemson fought for over these next 5 or 6 years, and we're going to go and be a middle-of-the-pack team, whereas Georgia Tech, Louisville, NC State could all theoretically run the conference. Like, they could be the big dog at that point. You also keep in the other logistical things of travel. You keep in the idea of, the rivalries you've built over the last 20, 30 years. Now, does that mean as much as the money? No, it doesn't. But it means something, right? Like the familiarity with your opponents playing in that North Carolina triangle or just whatever. I do think that means something to your fan base. So when you consider, really long-winded, obviously, but when you consider travel, when you consider the $75 million buyout that I don't know if these schools would have, when you consider the revenue disparity, because that's what it all comes down to, money, right? If you made, even if the Big Ten was able to break you even, right, and say like, oh, we'll bring you in at a bigger share, or we reworked our deal so you actually make the same as you do in the ACC. Well, if you're breaking even at that point, is the $75 million worth it when you could run the conference? Like, theoretically, Louisville would be the best team left in the conference. Would you leave if you were now the big dog making the most money with the most say and also pay money to leave? That's where I think the ACC, it had to be sheer luck because it certainly wasn't their foresight. That's where the ACC may have protected themselves once these big programs do leave.
Yeah, the only problem I have with that is longevity of the conference, long-term strength of the conference. I don't foresee it being there because the Big 12 survived off of adding brands like Utah, adding brands like Colorado, Arizona State. They made a huge splash to say, rest of the country, we're not just adding 4 mid-majors. We're not doing what the Pac-12 did and getting Boise State. We added big dogs who bring in Olympic sports success, football success, and a brand that you know. For the ACC, there will be nothing sexy when those schools leave. The best thing they could do is backfill with USF or Memphis. And from that point, you're already feeling the instability of, okay, they lost their Texas and Oklahoma, but who else is there? Now, we know that Louisville's still there. We know that maybe the Georgia Techs of the world, like you said, at table. But the rest of the country looks at it, and TV networks look at that, and they go, well, now what? You're far less valuable than we expected you to be. And when that contract is reworked in 2030, 2031, those 2 years are so crucial. I foresee, it has to. When your top 2 schools leave, ESPN or Fox won't look at the ACC and say, yeah, we'll give you the same amount of money, right? It's going to go down. So stability would be the thing that I think Brett Yormark will pick the phone up. He will call Louisville,
That's where I would agree with you. I think what the ACC may have done with this deal is buy them enough time to keep. They may be able to entice Louisville and Georgia Tech and some of these programs that we think the Big 12 would poach. I'm sorry. The ACC may be able to entice them to stay until 2036. Like, to me, that's the gray area. I have no doubts that when ESPN and the ACC have to redo their deal for 2037 and beyond, that is where the ACC is the most vulnerable. I think they've kind of given themselves not a completely fail-safe plan, but somewhat of a safety net from 2030 to 2036. Not saying that people couldn't leave in 2030, not saying that they wouldn't leave. I'm sure Yormark will try. I'm sure he will approach. But I do think there's at least At one point, I would have told you there's a 5% chance that Louisville and some of these teams stay in the ACC. I think that number is much higher now because of what we've kind of considered. However, in 2036, the dam's breaking open. Like there's no way ESPN reworks that deal for the same amount that it was. Right now, ESPN's kind of locked into it. Like they don't have an option to cancel anymore because they extended from 2027.
If North Carolina and Miami exit, then it's over. Because then they haven't backfilled enough to keep the 14.
They would have to backfill.
14.
Yeah, they'll have to. The composition clause means they'd have to add more teams. But I do think that they will. Yeah. Like I think they'll go out and add, which has to piss ESPN off.
Correct.
Because the rule is not, you got to get any views. It's just you got to have this many teams. So switching out at FSU for a USF is the most, bass backwards thing that you could do. Yeah. But it still qualifies. It's like my wife's like, hey, I got to have a car, and I replace her Tesla with, a Pinto, right? And she's like, well, you got a car. Oh, all you said was that you had to have a car. So that's a terrible analogy, but here it is on Thursday of.
But your wife wouldn't be happy, and ESPN is not happy,
and that's why I think maybe this bought. I just think they're a little more stable now than they were a year ago. But certainly, I think when we get to 2036, and maybe even before that, they're certainly in some trouble long term. Yeah. The conference will be a shell of itself. I think it'll probably still be better. Like the Syracuse, Boston colleges, and Wake Forest of the world are probably still better than what the Pac-12 has right now. Yeah. But they will be a clear. Like there's this argument of who's third and who's fourth, and the ACC is taking shots at the Big 12 and the Big taking shots here. There will be no argument past that. Like we will settle the debate. The ACC will be a clear fourth place.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe you're right. Maybe the lifespan is still there because they're able to backfill. We learned this with the college football playoff. We're so long-winded with this. I love it. Passion. We should disagree more often. The college football playoff committee looked at Oregon State, Washington State, and said, we're not giving you a full share of revenue. We know it's written in the contract, but we just can't. So I think ESPN, when you backfill, you replace Florida State with Memphis, ESPN says, we just can't. and that's where I think things will get hairy.
Yeah. That dichotomy is interesting too, because ESPN's paying pennies on the dollars right now for what they're getting out of Florida State. Like they've been getting a good deal for a minute. Yeah. And when they're not getting such a good deal, I certainly am interested to see how that, I'd love to be a fly on the wall as the cliche goes.